All right, welcome in, boys. You're watching the Run Pure Bets YouTube network. Today, got a special guest. Got a lot of respect for him. Used to watch him often at the Score. Excited to talk to him today about this Saturday's UFC Apex 6 card, headlined obviously by Lewis and Oleinik. That guest is James Lynch. Welcome, James. How you doing, buddy?
I'm doing awesome, Jay. Thanks so much for having me, man. Excited to talk some fights with you.
Yeah, man. I'm excited. Quickly, what are your overall thoughts on how the UFC has handled the pandemic so far, man? I think you can't ask for a better job, right?
Yeah, they've knocked it out of the park. I mean, you think of how much uncertainty there was when they first started, dating all the way back to, them trying to do UFC 249 to, going to Florida to now going to Fight Island. It's pretty remarkable what they've done, huh? If you look at the other sports, especially like Major League Baseball right now, like they're really struggling to get this thing figured out. But the UFC, they've been doing events seamlessly, and they're the only sport that's been so consistent. So props to Dana White and everyone else that's made this possible, because it's great for fight fans that we haven't really missed a beat at all since COVID started.
Yeah, I agree completely. People took what they were doing for granted, but I mean, we are literally seeing a Major League Baseball season that appears to be slowly slipping away, right? So, I mean, you can't ask for a better job than what Dana White did. I agree completely.
And just the logistics of it too. Just think how much testing they're doing, not only just with the fighters, but also the media members. They have to stay in a hotel. Like, I can't imagine the challenges they've had to face in getting this whole thing set up. But you just look at the fact that there's how many fighters have fought since this thing started at, a ton. And there's been only a few cases. I mean, it's pretty crazy to think that they've been able to control this. And also just the logistics of having to do an event in Abu Dhabi, and now they're back in Vegas. It's pretty remarkable to see what they've been able to do.
Couldn't agree more, man. Couldn't agree more. All right. So I know you break down the fights for a living. That's what we're going to do today. UFC Apex 6, obviously this Saturday night, they are back in Vegas, back from Fight Island. Main event we'll get to later on. Obviously, it's Lewis and Aleksei Oleinik. But we'll start at the bottom. First fight on the prelims, Aleksei versus Irwin Rivera. The first fight, obviously this fight, I don't know a ton about these fighters, if I'm being honest. I did watch some tape though on Kaisi in the Phoenix promotion. I know he's Jordanian. He looks like he has a solid submission game. He pulled a beautiful flying guillotine submission against Musad. I thought it was pretty impressive. From what I've seen thus far, his striking leaves a little bit to be desired, I guess you would say. But he looks like a submission machine. I think he comes into the fight on a 5-fight win streak. And then obviously Irwin Rivera has one featherweight fight, I believe, under his belt in the UFC. I think he fought on the Overeem Harris card back in May. So what are your expectations from the first fight?
This is a really tough one, because if you look at what we've seen from both guys, there's not a ton to work with here, right? Like with Irwin Rivera, his last fight against Chikadze, the featherweight, he actually looked pretty good in that fight despite losing, but that was a weight class up. He's a natural bantamweight, so we're going to get to see him at his best in this fight, but he does have some quality wins on the regional scene. Danny Sabatello, who he defeated in Titan FC for the bantamweight title for Titan, that's what got him in the UFC, and Sabatello just won his last fight, so he's now the champ. So obviously Rivera is a guy that has fought some pretty decent competition. Also Lazar Stoyanovich, who was on the Contender Series, he defeated him as well on the regional scene. So I like the level of competition, because if you look at Aleksei, other than his last win, which was pretty solid, he beat a guy who was 9-3 at the time. Most of his opponents are guys that just don't have a lot of fights, and that could be for a variety of reasons. It's not necessarily he's taking easier fights; it's who's available. So I agree with you, though. The striking, it looks pretty good. The submissions look pretty good from him, but I really like Irwin Rivera here. What's interesting about this fight is I noticed he opened up as a bigger favorite. I see the line is now down to about a 2-1. So obviously some money coming in on Aleksei as far as that goes. But I think Rivera is the safe bet here. He comes from a great camp as well. Let's not ignore that. He trains at Stanford MMA, which is where you have Kamaru Usman, well, not Usman anymore, but Gilbert Burns. You have Logan Storley, who's in Bellator. He's getting a lot of good looks over there, and I think that's an advantage to him as well. So I would pick Rivera in this fight, but I'll be honest, I don't have a great read on this, just because I think there's too many unknowns with Aleksei heading into his debut. There's UFC jitters. There's a lot of factors at play here, but I think Rivera is your safe bet by decision in this one.
Yeah, so you think you'd go the decision route rather than lay the $2?
Yes, only because if you look at the last time Aleksei was finished, it was actually just his second pro fight. That was back in 2016. Now, again, he hasn't fought the level of competition that Rivera has, in my opinion. But I do think, with the fact that Rivera probably just wants to get the win here, right? Like, he knows that he lost his debut, even though it was a good showing. I know he's a guy that likes to finish, but I think on the side of caution, I would just go with a guy who's, I hate to say he's going to play it safe, but I almost feel like he just needs to get the win here. And I think usually when you have that mentality, that leads to him going the decision. So I think decision's a better bet here.
Yeah, I like it. Second fight, another featherweight fight. Youssef Zalal, Peter Barrett, the Moroccan Devil, huh? I know we've seen him a lot recently. Looked very good against Jordan Griffin about a month ago. And we know what Zalal is. He was a submission machine early on when he was fighting in LFA. And since he's made the jump to the big leagues, he has back-to-back decision victories in the UFC against Austin Lingo and Jordan Griffin. His opponent Saturday, Peter Barrett. Barrett has never fought in the UFC before, I believe, right? But he does have a win in the Contender Series from 2019 against Sang-Hoon Yu. And aside from that, he's primarily fought in Cage Titans. I watched a few of his fights last night when I was prepping for the show. I'll tell you, the kid's got power, man. I'll give him that. He has a bunch of knockout wins, a couple wins by doctor stoppage. And from what I've seen, he doesn't exactly have an overwhelming submission grappling game, but he definitely has some power. How do you see this fight playing out?
So I see this a little bit differently. Youssef Zalal, by the way, is taking this on short notice. Steve Garcia was supposed to fight Peter Barrett. Garcia, I don't know if it was an injury or something at a Jackson Wink. He ended up having to pull out of this one. So Zalal takes this on short notice, but he was getting ready anyways because his teammates, Chris Gutierrez and Jonathan Martinez, who he cornered last week, were already getting ready for their fight. So he's already in Vegas. He's already ready to go. So people saying short notice, I got to be worried about that. Don't be. He's ready to go. I talked to both these guys before the fight, so I kind of have an idea of both of them. The one concerning thing here for Barrett is that he's fighting at featherweight. Now, this is his natural weight class. He prefers fighting at 145 on Contender Series, which you just referenced. He fought at 155, but he hasn't fought at 145 since 2017. So that's a bit of a time since we've actually seen him in that weight class. Now, that's actually the same reason why he hasn't fought since the Contender Series. It's going to be about a year since he's stepping back in the cage. Basically, what Barrett told me was that he wanted to fight at featherweight. The only opportunities he had in between there were short notice fights at 155. He didn't want to take that. He wanted to fight at 145. Now, with that said, I'm sure he's going to make the weight because he made such a fuss of wanting to fight at 145. And by the way, when I say fuss, I mean like good on him because it's the weight class is more optimal in. But I do have my concerns that if he's cutting that extra weight, is he going to be more susceptible to getting finished? You mentioned the Cage Titan fights. He's been finished a few times. In fact, if you look at one of his losses, it's actually the TJ Brown, who's actually in the UFC right now. That was at Cage Titans 36. And he's been clipped a couple times. And even in that Contender Series fight, it wasn't an easy fight. He barely got through that one. And, no shade on his opponent. But it was almost one of those fights where you weren't really sure if Barrett was going to win, let alone get the contract. So I actually see this fight with Zalal getting the finish. And you can actually get him inside the distance right now at plus money. I wouldn't go with the knockout or submission prop just because you never know how it's going to go. Maybe Zalal could knock him down and then submit him. But right now you can get Youssef Zalal at plus money with inside the distance because I see right now Zalal is about a 4-1 favorite, which is crazy. I mean, he should be favored, but not by that much. But I think inside the distance is solid. Zalal's been dying to get a finish. He tried to in his last fight. He tried to in his debut. It hasn't happened, but he has finishes on the regional scene. And I think with the fact that Barrett's cutting that extra weight, with the fact that he hasn't fought in a year, I think that leads well to the younger guy in Zalal, the Factory X product, going out there and getting a finish. So I'm going to take Youssef Zalal inside the distance in the second round. I think he clips Peter Barrett, either knocks him out via TKO or he gets a submission, but I think Zalal takes this one.
Yeah, I got to tell you, from my perspective, I think it's the only look you can really have in this fight because he opens at a slightly over a $3 favorite. He is now minus 460 at Pinnacle. He has taken a lot of money, man. So the fact that you can get plus money inside the distance, I agree. I think it's really the only way that you can look. So I like it. All right. Justin James, Gavin Tucker. Man, super fast turnaround for Justin James. Now, it's not a Chimaev 10-day turnaround, right? But still a pretty fast one. And obviously, for those that don't know, Justin James comes in on short notice to fight Frank Camacho. And even though he was a big underdog, and he had never fought in the UFC before. That kid put on a show, man. He had a phenomenal first round, leads to a knockout win over Camacho. And I was really, really happy for the guy listening to him in the post-fight press conference. And, in that fight, his hands looked really good. Even though we knew he had a very solid wrestling base, nobody thought his striking would look that good, including Camacho, right? But, now he takes on Gavin Tucker, Canadian kid, I think. Fought before in the UFC. I believe UFC 240 was the last time that he fought, but I could be wrong. I think he's won 2 out of 3 in the octagon so far. And I think he fights at a Titan MMA, right?
I believe so. Yeah, it's one of those camps out east in Eastern Canada. That's usually where he trains out of. It's not like a notable gym or anything. Right.
Yeah. He's got a black belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and of the 11 wins, 5 are by way of submission. He submitted Sung Woo Choi in his last fight in the UFC, but I don't think his hands are they're not terrible. I mean, he's got 4 wins by knockout. I'm looking forward to this one, man. I'm really rooting for this kid. He has a fan in me after that first fight in the UFC coming in on short notice. What do you think about this fight?
This is another interesting fight. So another couple interesting stats sort of heading into this one. James is going to be fighting at featherweight. Now, he's fought as heavy as welterweight in his career. His last fight was at 155. So you mentioned the short notice, and I interviewed him. He says he's going to make the weight, but it's still kind of a quick turnaround for him to take this fight at 145 because he just fought at 155, and it's not like it was an easy cut for him in terms of that because, like I said, he's fought a lot at welterweight. So the first thing we got to look at in this fight is the weigh-in. Does James make the weight? I think he will, but still, that's a pretty tough cut for him heading into this fight. Now, Gavin Tucker, you're right. He hasn't fought since UFC 240. He hasn't actually fought that much at all since he lost to Rick Glenn. If you remember that fight, it was a pretty one-sided beatdown in a fight where I think people felt like Tucker's corner should have thrown in the towel. Yes. Or the referee should have stepped in. It was just, that was one of the biggest beatdowns you'll ever see in the octagon. And I'm a Canadian as well, so I'm not trying to throw any shade at Gavin Tucker. I like the guy, but that was a really bad performance. And he came back in his last fight and he won, but let's not forget in that fight, he got dropped, right? Sang Woo Choi actually dropped him in that fight early on. Tucker went on to win and get the submission win in the 3rd round as well, but that's very concerning. And you're fighting a guy in Justin James who just knocked out Frank Camacho, who has a lot of knockout wins, who's fought welterweights, who's knocked out people in higher weight classes. That's a scary combination here. And for that reason, I'm actually going with Justin James for the upset here. Another, we talked about prop bets. I think Justin James by knockout right now is some crazy thing. I think it's like plus 200 or something along those lines. But I would look at that because I think James has a chance to clip him and take him out here, especially with the fact that James has been a lot more active. Tucker, like I said, hasn't been, fighting as frequently. So I just don't like Tucker's striking defense. And I think James can exploit that and get another knockout win here. So I'm going with Justin James for the upset. Trying not to be unpatriotic here, but I do think he gets the job done.
Let me ask you a question. When you talk to him, did he tell you what he walks around at?
He wouldn't give me a specific number, but it sounded to me like it was above almost sounded like maybe like around 160. Now, this was a couple weeks ago. So obviously a lot can change since then. And he's in Vegas. So I'm sure he's, getting a run outside. The heat's pretty good. So he's trying, sweating those pounds off. But it is a little bit concerning, like I said, because he just hasn't fought. I mean, I would try to even look on his record. He has a lot of catch weight fights. As far as actually 145 or 146 on the dot is what he needs to make. It's been a while. So that is one area of concern.
Yeah, and Justin James right now inside the distance is plus 250.
Yeah, exactly.
So that's not bad.
Him by knockout, I'm looking at him by knockout right now. It's plus 295. So you might as well just take him inside the distance, but because it's not a huge discrepancy. But still, I think if he does finish this, it'll be by knockout. Because even though Tucker hasn't been finished in his career, I just don't like the way he's been hit so much. And I think if you're fighting a guy like James who packs a punch like he does, it's a recipe for disaster.
Yeah, man, I really like the way his hands looked in that fight against Frank Camacho. So, yeah, I like that play. All right, next fight, Andrew Sanchez, Wellington Turman. Oh, man, James, I mean, I know that he initially came in through the Ultimate Fighter in 2016, but tell me it doesn't feel like Andrew Sanchez has been lingering around the UFC, bro, for 30 years. I mean, it has. He's been here forever.
Yeah, and just struggling to find consistency. That's been the thing. Remember how much people were high on this guy when he was on The Ultimate Fighter, and it just hasn't gone according to plan. Now, granted, he's been fighting some tough competition here and there, but a lot of what I don't think people realize is it's been a camp issue for him. You know, when he came out of The Ultimate Fighter, initially he trained back home in New Jersey, then he went to Syndicate MMA, and that actually, I think, made him worse. I don't think it was a good fit for him, and that's why you saw him and Eric Spicely both leave that camp and go to TriStar, and I think now we're starting to see the dividends of him training over at TriStar in these fights. So I did have a chance to speak to Sanchez before this fight. Didn't really get an optimal camp in Quebec and in Montreal where he trains. The gym's still closed as far as I know. So he's been doing a lot of training at home and just training with who he can and doing sort of like private sessions and stuff. I know a lot of fighters have to deal with this as well, but that's, it's obviously different than the gym being open. So, and as far as, getting to work with Firas Zahabi, I know there's been a bit of contact, but not that one-on-one contact I'm sure he's used to. So that's a bit concerning, but I do, just speaking to him, he feels like he's very confident. He feels like he's very dangerous. He sort of talked about the fact that he finally feels like he's coming into his own training at TriStar and that it's been the right fit. So, just listening to what he has to say and looking at Wellington Turman, I mean, here's a guy that obviously came off a nice win in his last fight, rebounded from that loss to Carl Roberson and got a win over Marcus Perez. But I do think this is an opportunity for Sanchez to really show us what he's made of. He fought Marvin Vettori in his last fight. He lost that one. Vettori, as we know, very, very talented guy in that division.
Right.
I think this is a fight where
2 out of the last 3, though.
Yeah, exactly. But I think this is the fight where we're really going to see that Andrew Sanchez we thought we would see, not just a wrestler, a guy that's refined his striking. And Sanchez really feels like he's going to get the finish in this fight. And I don't like to be biased towards guys that I interview, but just I got such a good sense from talking to him that he really feels like this is the fight he's going to put it all together. So I'm actually taking Andrew Sanchez here. I think he's going to show us what we've been waiting to see for years in these fights. And I think he's going to put on a really good striking clinic. And I think he's going to either knock out Wellington Turman or perhaps drop him and get the finish here. And again, he has a few advantages in this fight. He does have a bit of a reach advantage in this one. Sanchez with a 76-inch reach, Turman only a 72-inch reach. So I think Sanchez will use that range well, pick his shots, and get a finish in this one as I'm choking here.
Yeah, I mean, Sanchez, the plus 130 underdog right now. So I like it. I like the underdog call. All right, next fight. This kid. Nasrat Haqparast, Alex Munoz. I got to tell you, bro, there were not many prospects that I was higher on than Nasrat Haqparast. I really thought going into that fight with Drew Dober, even though Dober has definitely put something together over the last year and change, I still thought Haqparast being so well-rounded would be enough for Dober's, that power range striking wrestling game. I mean, I was wrong. I did not make the mistake. Obviously, the next time when Drew Dober fought Hernandez, I made sure that I was on him. But nevertheless, man, I still think that this kid has the potential to be something special, right? But now I feel like he has something to prove to me. That being said, you almost have to think the UFC. Initially, I said to myself, well, did the UFC book him a get right spot against a kid that's got 6 pro fights? And if we know anything, obviously, about Zahabi, it's, I'm sure that he's probably trained Nasrat for the fight like he was fighting for a world championship, right? I mean, that's what they do at TriStar, right? But it makes me think like the minus 240 is almost cheap on Haqparast. Now, I know Munoz is at the World Series of Fighting, right? A Division I wrestler, and he's 6-0. I think he beat Newell, right? Yeah. So, what? First of all, what are your thoughts on Haqparast? And then, is this kid lie at 6-0 to actually make a run at him? You think?
Yeah, this is a tough one. This kind of looks to me like a matchup that was kind of favored towards Haqparast. His managers, he's part of Dominance MMA. I think sometimes you see the matchmaking sort of favor their fighters, and this looks like a case of that here because Nick Newell is also a Dominance MMA fighter, and you'll notice that I almost see this as like a revenge thing. This is kind of my crazy conspiracy theory about this fight. Right. Munoz only has 6 fights. You could argue that I don't even know if he's ready for the UFC at this point. He did beat Nick Newell. He didn't get signed. He got a win over a top prospect in Troy Lamson, and that's what got him in the UFC. But he's only got 6 fights. He's fighting a guy who's got 14 fights. It's a huge difference in experience. And you look at Haqparast, who did he lose to in his last fight? Drew Dober, a guy who's really turned his career around over the last couple fights. He got knocked out in the first round there. I think this is a fight that favors Haqparast. At 2-1, I actually don't think that's too bad of a line here, because even though Munoz is undefeated, he just hasn't fought a lot of really good competition. I mean, if you look at his first 3 fights, none of those were winning records. First guy he fought in his debut were 0-2. Second guy after that, actually, sorry, the second guy he fought was 2-0, but still not a lot of experience there. The guy after that he fought was 1-1.
And what's crazy is he's taking money. That the line's going down. Yeah.
No, he's a good wrestler, but you got to think as well that here's a guy in Haqparast who's training with world-class wrestlers at TriStar, right? So it's not like it's not like Munoz is going to bring something to the table that he hasn't seen yet. So I think this is definitely Haqparast's fight to lose, unless he makes a mistake. I see him either winning a pretty dominant decision or potentially getting a stoppage in this one, but you can't ignore the experience factor here for Haqparast. I think he takes care of it. And just quickly looking at the height and reach here, Munoz is 5'9", Haqparast is 5'10" with a 72-inch reach. So Haqparast's going to have some advantages there as well. I think this is his fight to lose.
Yeah, I agree completely. And oftentimes when you're betting the sport of MMA, you see lines go in the wrong way that do not win. And that happens often. So, I mean, the fact that you can get a 30-cent discount right now from the opening line on Nasrat Haqparast, it's almost a must bet spot, I think. And listen, I understand that there's a path to victory for this kid because, he's a D1 wrestler. But I mean, come on, man. You have to think that Haqparast is seeing kids way better than him on the mat at TriStar every day. Mm-hmm. So I agree, man. I think I'm laying it. I think I'm laying it big. Yeah.
No, I agree. I think Haqparast, like I said, it's his fight to lose. That's how I look at this fight.
Yeah. All right. Next fight, middleweight fight between Holland and Buckley. Kevin Holland, man, he's been one of those standout fighters over the last year. And he's consistent. He continues to thrive for the promotion. 4-1 since his loss to Thiago Santos in 2018. And the one loss was a submission loss to Brendan Allen, I think. And in that fight, it could have gone it could have gone the other way, right? Didn't he get caught? Wasn't he winning that fight until Brendan Allen caught him in the sub?
Yes. So Holland, I was at that fight actually. That was in Boston. That's where he was winning the first round, and then Allen was able to come back and submit him. But actually, he had a fight after that. He defeated Anthony Hernandez, knocked him out in 39 seconds. So Holland's actually looking to make it 2 straight. Holland was supposed to fight last weekend against Trevin Giles before Giles ended up fainting. So great opportunity here fighting a newcomer in Joaquin Buckley.
Yeah, I mean, I like him, man. I like that black belt that he's got in Kung Fu. I think he's training under Travis Lutter for BJJ. He almost has as many submissions as knockouts. And, he seems to be able to get what he wants in that cage against most of that division. Now, his opponent, I don't know much about Buckley. You would have to fill me in because I haven't watched the tape on him yet. I know he's got multiple wins in Bellator over DeJesus and Patterson. But, I would lean on you until I watch the tape later in the week. What do you think about his opponent?
Yeah, I haven't seen a ton of him either. The only fight I sort of remember that he had was against Logan Storley, where he got out wrestled basically for the whole round or whatever. This is a guy that has been sort of on the fringe of getting signed to something big. Because like I said, he fought for Bellator. I know they were pretty high on him. He's a guy that trains out of Missouri. He's with Finney's Hit Squad, which is a pretty notable gym out there. A lot of fighters started out there. Actually, I think Tyron Woodley started at that gym initially, and then ended up moving on to other things. So he's coming off a win actually at LFA 87, which is actually back in the 31st. So Buckley getting a quick turnaround, but same thing with Holland. Like he was supposed to fight, like I said, last weekend. So he's going to go in there. But I like Kevin Holland in this fight. I've always thought Holland is one of those guys that it's just really tough to take out. I mean, I was so surprised that Brendan Allen was able to submit him, because if you look at, even someone like Thiago Santos couldn't finish Kevin Holland. Right. So it just shows you how durable he is as an opponent. And Holland's good everywhere. You mentioned the jiu-jitsu, but his stand-up's pretty solid as well. I'd give a slight edge to Holland. The question is, does he finish this fight? Buckley seems like a pretty tough guy to finish in general. Like I said, if you look at, he's just got one stoppage loss, and that was first round finished by this guy named Jackie Gosh, who I've never heard of. So I don't have a great read on Joaquin Buckley, but I would just say probably safest pick is pick Holland by decision. He goes out there, puts on a dominant win, and moves forward.
Yeah, you certainly can't back him at -$6. That's a crazy price.
No. Yeah.
So gun to your head, you think it goes the full 15?
I do, yeah. Just to be safe. I mean, again, Holland just fought. Buckley seems like a pretty tough guy to finish, so I would err on the side of caution of Holland getting his hand raised by decision.
Yeah, I like it. All right, next fight is the feature prelim. Laureano, Staropoli, and man, the old man, Tim Means, keeps going. You got to respect Tim Means. I mean, the guy is what the sport's all about. It feels like he's had a million fights in that cage. Most people wouldn't even remember this, but I think he made his debut, bro, when like the UFC would. Remember when it was on Fuel TV?
Oh, yeah.
Back in the day.
Yeah, it was UFC on FX. Or sorry, yeah, you're right. Yeah. UFC on Fuel. That was his debut, 2012. He's been there for a while.
I mean, he's been there forever. I know he's lost 4 of his last 6 fights back to 2017, I think. And, the losses haven't exactly come from killers, but still decent guys. Rodriguez, Nico Price, Bilal Muhammad is always a tough out. So, I mean, he's still fighting legitimate UFC competition. At this point, we know what he is. He's a solid range striking game. His hand speed obviously starting to slow down the older that he gets. He no longer cuts the best angles, but his footwork, I would say, is still, average for the most part. And he's a guy that's got 19 knockouts in his career. Now, I actually watched a couple Staropoli fights last night. I think I was watching the Salikov fight and one other one. He's got a solid range striking game, but I'll tell you one thing about him. It seems like initially it takes him a while out of the gate to feel comfortable before he really starts to engage with somebody. Like a couple fights, you hear people booing these guys, especially him, before he really starts to get moving later on in that first round. So I almost wonder, like, does he accidentally give away a round because of the slow start? What do you think about this fight?
I think this is a potential for another upset here. Tim Means has way more experience than his opponent. He's coming up to 32 fights. Staropoli's only got 11. I mean, that's a huge gap. And I know Tim Means is getting up there in age. He's 36 now. He's taken some damage in his fights as well. But you look at that last fight against Daniel Rodriguez. I think a lot of people look at that and say, oh, this is a guy past his prime. But I talked to Tim Means, and he told me basically that in that last fight, he had a bunch of personal stuff going into that one. He had a family tragedy that headed in there. And he said basically he fought angry. And he said that, it totally threw off his whole game. And he knew that was a fight he could win, but because he was so emotional about everything, he just didn't fight the way he wanted. So, if you look at that, let's say he did go out there and win that fight. I mean, he's already got the win over Thiago Alves. He submitted him in the first round. I mean, here's a guy that is very game as an opponent, and you just don't go out there and easily finish a Tim Means. It's going to be a grind. It's going to be a war. That's how he likes to make his fights. So, Staropoli, well, I do like him. And the guy he just lost to, you mentioned Salikov. I mean, he looks pretty legit as far as a welterweight in that division. 10-1 overall now or something like that. He's looked really impressive. So I don't really count that too much as well either. But the question is, who's the better fighter? I actually think it's Tim Means here. And I think if he can keep his emotions in check, if he can go out there and show us the Tim Means that finished to Thiago Alves, that, can finish Ricky Rainey or Alex Garcia or someone like that. Well, he went to the decision with Garcia, but it's still a pretty good win. I think he can get it done here. You look at some of his losses, Bilal Muhammad, Sergio Moraes, those were split decision losses. Those were fights that he was in. And I think he's better than Staropoli. So I'm going to go Tim Means. Hate to go by decision again, but I do see that more likely just because Staropoli is a guy that has not been finished since his third pro fight back in 2013. So I don't know if Means will finish it. He could, but I think more than anything, he just wants to get the win here. And I think he's going to make it a hard-fought decision, but one that I think the judges will get right and give him the nod.
Yeah, and you mentioned Muhammad and Moraes. I mean, those are tough outs, man. They're not easy guys to beat. So, yeah, I like it. I like the upset. So you still think Tim Means got a little left in the tank, huh?
I do. Yeah, I do. And you can't ignore the experience. I mean, that stuff does matter in fights like this, right? Where you have someone that's just, been in there with the who's who in the welterweight division, where Staropoli, he's only had a couple fights in the UFC. So it's not, to me, it's when you get put in those different situations, right? A Tim Means will know what to do. A Staropoli won't, in my opinion. So that's where I think Means has an edge here.
I like it. First fight on the main card, lightweight fight, Beneil Dariush, Scott Holtzman. I'll tell you, James, I've always felt like Beneil Dariush has been on the cusp of being elite a few times in his career. But like then, I don't know, for some reason for me, I never feel like he gets over the hump. Now, however, I know he's going into this fight, I think 5 wins in a row. He knocks out close, submits Camacho and somebody else. Oh, Drew Dober, right before that. A really well-rounded MMA fighter, obviously, black belts in jiu-jitsu and Muay Thai. And my starting point in the fight is you need to be skilled enough to beat Beneil Dariush, right? Because he's so well-rounded. So is Scott Holtzman that guy? Now, Holtzman, I know he's won also 5 of his last 6 fights in the octagon. And initially I was like, wow, that's pretty impressive. But when you take a look at his competition, it looks slightly less impressive. Alan Patrick, yes. Michael McBride, Daryl Horcher. I mean, you know, these are not the guys that Beneil Dariush puts away, obviously, right? So break it down for me. Who do you like?
Yeah, I like Dariush. This is, you know, a lot of people are like, why did they make this fight? Dariush is ranked at number 14. Holtzman isn't even ranked. Dariush is on a nice winning streak in his last win. I mean, finishing Drakkar Klose, who's never been finished in his career, that's a huge feather in his cap, so to speak. So I thought, like, to me, it's like ever since he lost to Alex Hernandez, it seems like Dariush has turned a corner. He's really, you know, put things together, and we're just seeing an overall better fighter. Now, here's the thing with Scott Holtzman. He's a tough guy to put away. I mean, he's a very durable guy, and he's, you know, I spoke to him before this fight. Like, he knows he's going to have to get hit a little bit to hit his opponent back. That's just how it works. So Dariush is going to have this easy, and it's certainly, like, of all opponents, I mean, Holtzman's a guy that is certainly, you know, very durable, like I mentioned, but he is 36 years old. He does have some decent wins, like you said, but you look at most of his wins. I mean, I'm even looking here, like, you know, go back a couple of years, Daryl Horcher, McBride, Pfister. None of these guys are in the UFC anymore, right? So it's not like he's fighting guys that are mainstays, whereas Dariush, I mean, he's beating guys that are all on the roster right now. So I like Dariush here. The question is, can he finish Scott Holtzman? It's tough to say because Holtzman hasn't been finished in his career. I think this might be the fight he does it, though. I'm going to go like a late 3rd round TKO win for Dariush. Holtzman's going to have to take a lot of shots. I just think as the fight goes on, Dariush's striking will, you know, show a little bit more in this. And it could be a situation where, like I said, he could, you know, knock him down and get the submission, or he could, you know, go out there and potentially get a knockout like we saw in the Drakkar Klose fight as well. So I really like Dariush here. And I think, you know, right now, what I think most books are having him as like just a slight favorite here. I think that's great value here. Unless Holtzman does something we've never seen before, this is Dariush's fight to lose. I like Dariush in this fight.
Right. Yeah. Right now he's minus 175. You think there's still value in that?
Oh, big time. Big time. Yeah. I think unless Dariush does something, unless Holtzman does the Alex Hernandez game plan where he comes out of the gate and just attacks him and tries to knock him out and take his head off, I think that's the only way he can win, because I don't see him out wrestling him. I don't see him out striking him. I think Dariush is the better fighter overall. And I'm a big Scott Holtzman fan. He's actually a hockey fan like I am, which is very rare in MMA. So I'd like to see him win, but no, I think Dariush is the better fighter.
Yeah, I agree, man. I don't mind laying that 175 at all. Yana Kunitskaya, Julija Stoliarenko. All right. So Yana Kunitskaya obviously welcomed roughly into the UFC, right? I think she fought Cyborg, I think, in her first UFC fight. She gets decimated. She finds her footing against less skilled opposition. She grabs a decision win, I think, over Landsberg and then Marion Renault. Who'd she fight? Aspen Ladner last fight. She got knocked out, right?
She did. But yeah.
I hold on, right before I throw it to you. Yeah. I know that she doesn't. Kunitskaya seems to not handle pressure well, especially from power punchers. Then I go and watch this girl, Stoliarenko. I mean, man. I watched it on Invicta this morning, one of the greatest women MMA fights I've seen in a long time. It wasn't like Joanna and Zhang, but I mean, when she fought for the belt in Invicta, I mean, she looks like a killer. I mean, you can get her at plus 200 right now. What do you think about this fight?
Well, it's really just a striker versus grappler, basically. I mean, Stoliarenko's most of her wins are by submission. There was a point where she had 3 arm bars in a row that lasted, I think, a total of like a minute, not even, back when she was fighting in some promotion I've never heard of. There was like Celtic Gladiator. I've never heard of that. But Stoliarenko, if you remember, also was on The Ultimate Fighter. She fought She beat Marcia Allen and then ended up losing to Pani Kianzad and then Leah Letson at the tough finale. So this is actually Stoliarenko's second rodeo in the UFC. But Kunitskaya, you mentioned the Cyborg fight. She got a couple nice wins after that over Lena Landsberg and Munoz. But that Aspen Ladd fight, she was actually looking good in that one before she got knocked out. And it wasn't until Ladd made some adjustments where she just went out there like a bat out of hell in that third round and knocked her out within 33 seconds. So I think Kunitskaya is a pretty solid fighter. I think she keeps us on the feet, and I think she outstrikes Stoliarenko. I don't see Stoliarenko taking Kunitskaya to the ground. Kunitskaya has been submitted twice in her career. Once was against Tanya Evinger back in 2017, and the other one was against someone I've never heard of, Zaria something, back in Absolute ACB. It was back in 2016. So, I mean, it's possible she could get submitted, but I just don't see that happening. And you look at the level of competition as well. I mean, Kunitskaya has fought way better, tougher competition than Stoliarenko does. So there's a lot of reason to like Kunitskaya in this fight. Women's fights most often go the distance. I think the only way you would look to bet this inside the distance is if you feel very confident in Stoliarenko getting the submission. I think that's an option, but I think more likely than not, Kunitskaya decision, bank it. I think it happens.
Yeah, I mean, you're not going to lay minus 250 on Yana Kunitskaya for sure. I would assume that she's probably somewhere around even money by decision, which we know probably 80% of women's MMA fights end by decision. So Kunitskaya by decision for you.
Yes, that's what I go with. Most women's fights go the distance. That's usually how it goes. So
right. All right. Darren Stewart, Maki Pitolo. Last fight, I think, before the main and the co-main, middleweight fight. I know this is like Darren Stewart's 10th fight in the UFC. I had to go back and check his record. If you throw Stewart's last fight, which was, I think, in Cage Warriors, out of the equation, he's won 4 of his last 5 fights, and the one loss in that stretch was to Edmund Shabazian. So, I mean, it could be worse for him. We know I obviously black belt in Taekwondo, purple belt in BJJ. I like his striking game too. Probably better in the pocket, in my opinion, than at range. I think, he's got an average stand-up game for the middleweight division. Maybe average. I don't know much about his opponent, though. He's another guy in the next 2 days that I have to watch some fight tape on. So what's your thoughts on Pitolo and then the fight as a whole?
I like Darren Stewart in this fight. If you remember, they referenced him last weekend because he went to a split decision against Edmund Shabazian. So he's a guy that, he's been in the UFC. I think he's kind of underrated, to be honest. He's had some good wins. He had the knockout win over Eric Spicely, had the knockout win over Charles Byrd, beat Bavon Lewis, who a lot of people felt like was going to be this next big prospect in the middleweight division, beat Deron Wynn. He actually lost his last fight. This was so interesting because of the pandemic. Cage Warriors put on a card, but took a bunch of UFC fighters so they could keep active, a bunch of fighters that were supposed to fight on UFC London. So he actually is coming off a loss to Bartosz Fambinski, but there could be a variety of reasons why he lost that fight. I mean, this was right in the heyday of COVID. What type of camp did he have? So I don't really look too much at that last fight, but I think in general, Stewart's a very dangerous guy, and he's a little bit more established at middleweight. I mean, Pitolo, if I'm not mistaken, I think this is his 3rd fight. So he basically, with Pitolo, he knocked out Justin Sumter in that fight. Do you remember that fight actually with Sumter on Contender Series where Gianni the Greek, the betting guy, said, bet Sumter, he's going to knock him out, and the opposite happened. Pitolo was like a huge underdog. He ended up knocking out Justin Sumter in the very first round. This guy's called Coconut Bombs, and with good reason. This guy has some serious
that's
power.
Coconut Bombs. Yes, bro.
Yeah.
He just fought recently.
He beat Charles Byrd. Yes, he did. Back at UFC 250. He knocked him out as well. So we know what's going to happen in this fight. Either Pitolo is going to knock out Darren Stewart, which, I mean, Stewart has been finished before, but not by knockout. He's actually never been finished by knockout in his career. So that's, good for the Stewart side of things. And I see the situation being like Pitolo is going to try and go for broke like he did against Charles Byrd, like he got the knockout there, or he's going to end up losing a decision like he did against Kalen Potter. And I think that's more likely what happens here. I think Stewart, either takes some shots or he, was able to avoid some of those big shots from Coconut Bombs, and he ends up going out there and just, being a little bit more technical and does enough to get a decision here. Again, I hate you going with decision here, but Pitolo's a pretty tough guy to finish. You look at Darren Stewart in terms of some of his stoppage wins. They're mainly by knockout. I don't see him knocking out Pitolo, but I do see him potentially getting a decision here. Stewart's a tough outing, a very tough outing for a lot of guys. I've read Pitolo's fights so wrong in the past. I think I bet him, I think I picked him against Potter and he ended up losing. I picked Sumter against him and he ended up beating him. And then I picked Bird in that fight for some reason. And I thought that he was going to beat Pitolo, and that didn't end up happening. But I think I got this one right. I think Stewart's going to win, and I'm going to stick with that. I think Darren Stewart by decision.
What the money line is -175. Do you think there's value in the straight?
I do. Yeah. Unless Pitolo knocks him out. But I just, like I said, you look at some of the guys that he fought Edmund Shabazian. How many guys has Edmund Shabazian knocked out? Plenty.
Sure.
And if for Stewart to go a split decision in that fight, I think it shows that he can take a shot. And I don't think a guy like Pitolo will be able to knock him out. So that's sort of what I see happening. I see Pitolo trying to overexert himself, going for the knockout, getting tired, Stewart's cardio taking over, and him pulling off the win here. That's how I see this happening.
Well, you know what I appreciate? I appreciate a guy having the brass balls to nickname himself Coconut Bombs.
Right.
I think that's fantastic. All right, co-main event. The All-American, man. I got a soft spot in my heart for Chris Weidman, man. He takes on, obviously, Omari Akhmedov. My starting point in every Chris Weidman fight since UFC 194 is, how long does this fight need to last in order for Chris Weidman's god-awful chin to get tapped and for him to fall, right? Because Luke Rockhold, something happened in that fight, man. He cracked that jaw, and it was never the same. The last 5 times that Weidman's lost in the cage, it's been 5 knockouts. And, that chin is a really tough hill for me to overcome anytime I'm looking to back Chris Weidman. Now, I know he's a great wrestler. I know that Akhmedov is a really good grappler. So in theory, this could potentially be settled on the ground. And I think in at least once in all of their fights, it's gone to the ground. But you know what they say, brother. All these fights start on the feet, and it's hard to back Weidman when he's standing because that chin is so bad. What do you think about the co-main?
I think the chin thing's a little overrated, and let me tell you why. Because you got to look at who he's fighting. I think a lot of people ignore that. It's not like Weidman's getting knocked out by like a Marvin Vettori or something. No offense to Vettori, but like someone that just doesn't finish fights. Like it's not what's been happening. He lost his last fight to Dominic Reyes, the same Dominic Reyes who nearly beat John Jones earlier this year. His loss before that was against Jacare Souza, another top guy. Gegard Mousasi, Yoel Romero. These are the who's who in the middleweight division. It's not like he's fighting cans. And then in between there, he's got to win over Calvin Gastelum, which I know now doesn't look as good, but I remember at the time being like, Weidman hasn't gone anywhere. It's just, he had some bad luck, but there's a couple things. I interviewed Weidman before this fight, and he didn't spend a ton of time at Longo MMA just because he, with what's going on with COVID. So he's actually spent the majority of his camp at Upstate Karate training with Stephen Wonderboy Thompson. So he's been training out there. He's been getting some different looks. I know he's been training with Carl Reed as well, who's a light heavyweight there, who, if you remember, was on Contender Series. He's gotten a bunch of different looks over there. And actually, I don't know if most people know, Weidman's actually moving away from New York. He's permanently moving out to South Carolina and going to be doing, I think, his camps partially at Longo's and at Upstate Karate. So a little bit of interesting things there as well. But I just asking him, I said, how's the cut going to middleweight? Because the whole reason he went up to light heavyweight was because it was becoming a tough cut. He says it's tough, so I think he'll make the weight, but that is a bit of concern because, as we know, if you cut more weight and you're getting older, you're more susceptible to the knockout. But here's the part where I get confused by a lot of people. When was the last knockout win Omari Akhmedov had? Do you know? I'll tell you. That was a trick question. It was he had a win over Brian Ebersol, which was a TKO win, but that was a knee injury. That's how he ended up winning that fight. You have to go all the way back to November of 2013, the last time Omari Akhmedov had a knockout win. And by the way, that knockout win was at welterweight. Let's not forget, this is a guy that fought at welterweight a good chunk of his career.
So you're only recently saying if you throw the knockout out of the equation, you favor Weidman on the ground over Akhmedov?
I think Weidman's the better fighter, but here's where I'm going to kind of maybe confuse your audience a little bit here as I sort of get through the rest of this here. So I think a lot of people are putting too much stock into Weidman getting knocked out and not looking at who he's fighting, right? Like that's sort of what I look at. But like I said, the weight cut, there's a bit of an issue there. Like I said, when I spoke to him, he wasn't, he could have lied to me and said, oh, it's going great, but he was honest. He's like, look, it's not ideal right now. Right. So there's that. So there's that to keep in mind. There's number 2 is that he's not training at his normal camp. He's training with Wonderboy, which is good. Wonderboy's a great fighter, but still, not being at your usual camp, that's got to be another strike against you. The third thing obviously is his age. is that he's, 36 years old and he's taken a lot of damage and he's had a lot of injuries and he hasn't fought that much over the last couple of years. He fought last year, he fought in 2018, and he fought 2 times in 2017. So he hasn't fought nearly as much as Akhmedov has. So just putting that in perspective here with all of those things, just because, that this is going to sort of lead to my pick here, I'm going to go Akhmedov, but I'm not going to go by knockout. I think Akhmedov, because of the fact he's been more active, because of the fact that he's younger and he's just, he's been on a roll. And that last one over Ian Heinisch is very impressive. Heinisch is a guy that I think is still a good middleweight in that division. I think Akhmedov's at the right weight class now. I think he gets it done, but I don't think Akhmedov knocks him out. I think Akhmedov probably goes the distance. And I do wonder if Akhmedov is going to have some struggles with Weidman because Weidman's bigger. He's 6'2" with a 78-inch reach. Akhmedov is only 6 feet tall with a 73-inch reach. So there's a 5-inch reach advantage for Chris Weidman in this fight. That's something that's, very interesting as far as the matchup goes. So this is what I would say about this fight. I think Akhmedov will likely win a decision here. And I know people are probably already saying, why are you always picking a decision? Well, because I don't think he's going to knock Weidman out. Again, there's not enough evidence for me to say that he's going to go out there and knock him out when his last knockout win was in 2013. But if you're looking to bet this fight, because I think Weidman is the favorite right now, just looking at the odds right now, he is. It's funny because Akhmedov opened as the favorite, and I see people are now betting Weidman, probably for the reasons I just mentioned there. But I think if you're going to bet this fight, I would almost look at like a Weidman inside the distance, because I think if Chris wins, it's going to be impressive. And I think if he loses, it's going to be a close fight, but one where Akhmedov was a little bit more active. So that's how I'm going with this one. I know it's kind of a weird analysis on that, but that's just how I feel, is that I think Weidman's the better fighter. But we've seen over and over again, look at Tyron Woodley, look at some of these other fighters that have just, Rafael dos Anjos, guys that have been in the sport for so long, that have had injuries, that are getting older. They tend not to win against these new up-and-comers. So that's sort of what I'm basing it on. I think Akhmedov wins, but I do think if there's an opportunity for Weidman to look like the old Weidman, it's this fight, because this is, I think, the first opponent he's had in years that isn't like a contender. So that's how I'm going with on this one.
All right, so a couple questions.
Yeah.
Well, first, the size advantage is an interesting point. That could mean a lot, right? Yeah. All right, so let's put that aside. My first question would be, if this stays on the feet for 3 rounds and they're not rolling around on the mat, do you trust Omari Akhmedov's striking game enough to win a points battle and edge rounds?
I do, because I think he's a little bit faster. And that's where I think it could be the difference here, where him sort of, going in and out, and Weidman, he is looking a little bit slower these last couple of fights. And I don't know if that's because of the injuries or the age, but I don't think it's the same Weidman that fought Anderson Silva. So I'm kind of banking on the fact that Akhmedov, the younger guy, might be able to go out there and outstrike him. It might not happen, but I think, usually in situations like this where you have a younger guy that's fighting a veteran, it usually goes well for the younger guy. And not that Akhmedov's like a huge, like he's 32. It's not like a huge age difference. Right. So we're talking 4 years, but still, I think he's a little bit more fresh in terms of the two opponents. And he hasn't really taken any damage in his career. If you look at, even his losses, he had back-to-back knockouts at welterweight, but in general, he hasn't taken a ton of damage. So not compared to Weidman. So that's something to factor in this fight as well. My
second question would be, if it becomes a grappling match, do you trust Akhmedov's grappling over Weidman's solid wrestling foundation and really good top control?
See, that's where I'm not as confident. Like, I think Weidman's wrestling is obviously better than Akhmedov's. And even though Akhmedov has a pretty decent ground game, I don't know if he'll even be able to implement that with Weidman's wrestling, like getting in those positions he wants to get his opponents. Because let's be honest, this is the best opponent Akhmedov has fought by far. I mean, Heinisch is great, but I think Weidman on paper is definitely the best fighter that Akhmedov has fought in his career. So, that's why this is such an interesting matchup. Like, I laugh at people who are like, oh, Weidman's going to get knocked out. His chin is down. I'm like, I see that side of it, but look who he's fighting. He's not fighting a power puncher. Like, he's not fighting like if he was fighting Edmund Shabazian, for example.
Yeah, that's a fair point. Yeah, definitely.
But like I think someone like if he was fighting an Edmund Shabazian, I would almost be more confident in a Shabazian, because he does have a lot of knockout power. Whereas a guy like, Akhmedov's not really known for his knockouts. He's known for sort of winning decisions, right?
Yeah, that's a fair point, man, for sure. All right, well, I like it. So, I mean, you can tell how this line, you've been able to get plus money on both sides
exactly.
of this fight over
Which is kind of rare sometimes, right? So,
yeah, what I do like, listen, I still think that Chris Weidman's striking game is underrated, even though he's getting older. At plus 333, if he manages to hit the button on Akhmedov and drop him, that's not a bad look.
No, I agree. And by the way, if you want to get Akhmedov by decision, it's plus 424 right now. So I don't know. You could figure out the math there. Maybe do like a Weidman inside the distance with a Akhmedov. It's both plus money. So,
Right.
that's something to consider. Because I just, unless Chris has really fallen off a cliff in terms of his durability, like we're really banking on that. And I just think that's too tough to tell at this point because of who he's fighting. Like, look how many guys Dominic Reyes has finished. Look how many guys, Romero has stopped in his career. Like, it's not like he's fighting guys that aren't known for that. That's all they're known for, right? So that's sort of what I look at here. You got to look at the level of competition heading into a fight like this.
Yeah, I mean, he basically lost to like the top 4 of the middleweight division and the guy that almost beat John Jones.
Exactly.
So, those are all fair points for sure. All right, main event: Aleksei Oleinik, Derrick Lewis. I guess you would say it's like a semi-classic striker grappler matchup. Derrick Lewis is one of the most infuriating people to bet on, James, and to watch, especially when you have money on him, because Lewis has like that mind-altering power. Now, granted, Ngannou is on like his own freak level, right? But nevertheless, I mean, he has sick power, Derrick Lewis, right? But he's such a low-volume striker because the only thing I can attribute it to is how subpar his cardio seems to be. So when you bet on him, you need him to land that one punch on the button that's pretty much guaranteed to end somebody's day, because if he doesn't get that, he's almost guaranteed to lose the fight on points, right? And on the flip side, I'm on Alexander Volkov. He destroys the guy for 4 minutes and 50 seconds, and then Derrick Lewis decides he wants to fight, and he knocks the guy out in 4.5 seconds. You know what I mean? So for me, now, obviously, we know what Oleinik is. He's a grappler that always finds a way to get it to the ground and lock in that Ezekiel choke more times than not, right? So the question comes for me, can Oleinik get inside to get Lewis to the ground without Lewis landing that kill shot when Aleksei comes in on the entry for the takedown? And like, that's a hard preposition, in my opinion, to weigh. Do you think that, that's a big factor in the fight? How do you see the fight?
Yeah, I think this, unlike the last fight, I think this fight's a lot simpler to look at. I think it's either Oleinik by submission or Lewis by knockout. There's a couple interesting things, though. Like, Lewis has not been able to finish his last 2 opponents. In fact, those, I think, were 2 of his maybe worst performances in the octagon, even though they're wins. The Blagoy-Ivanov fight, I'm not even sure he won that one. I was at that fight at UFC 244. That was a super close fight. The Latifi fight, I mean, he's fighting a guy who realistically could almost be a middleweight with how small he is. And he had trouble with him as well, too. And we saw Latifi get knocked out at light heavyweight against Volkov. So it's like, he's not coming into this looking very good. And then he lost to JDS before that, and he lost to Cormier. The thing is, though, it's not like he's fighting Oleinik, who's like a power puncher. Like, if he was fighting, let's say Oleinik's superpower was striking, I would almost favor him here because of the fact that, Lewis is going to want to stay standing, and like he did in the JDS fight, and he ended up paying the price for it when he lost to JDS. But he's got the submission game, and he's only got the 1 submission loss to Cormier in his career, which is interesting, right? Because it's like, here's a guy that, normally is very tough to get to the ground. Even like if a Daniel Cormier can't get you to the ground until the second round, I think that speaks volumes of what Oleinik is dealing with here. And the other factor is Oleinik, I mean, at some point, I know Yoel Romero is a guy that's defying age, but Oleinik's 43. I mean, at some point that's got to catch up to you. He looked great in his last fight. That was probably one of the best performances we've seen of Oleinik in his UFC career, was that dominant win over Fabricio Verdum. But obviously Verdum coming in on a layoff. But Oleinik looked in great shape. I did have a chance to speak to Oleinik, ahead of this fight. He basically mentioned that he felt like his cardio, at least when I spoke to him a couple of weeks ago, was not at the same pace it was for the last camp. So he's had some issues heading into this one. So I don't know if he's going to look as polished as he did in the last fight. And if he isn't, I think this is Lewis's fight to lose. I just think with 5 rounds and the amount of knockout power that Lewis has, he's got to connect at least once on Aleksei Oleinik. And I think if he does, he's going to sleep, because Oleinik has suffered losses like he did to Overeem and to Harris and to, Curtis Blades, fights like that where, he's just been cracked and he takes a lot of damage. So I just see Oleinik having a very tough time taking Lewis to the ground. I think Lewis, the fact that he's lost some weight and that he's been a little bit more mobile, I think makes him harder to take down at this point, because he's going to be able to he'll be a little bit more more mobile. And so I don't think Oleinik will have a better opportunity to go up there and try and take him to the ground. So like to me, Oleinik's only way to win this fight is if he can take it to the ground. I don't see him out striking Lewis. Maybe he could, but so I don't see Oleinik getting into the ground. And I see more often than not, because this is a 5-round fight, I see Lewis at least clipping him once. And I think that's it. I think Lewis wins this. And I think it's very interesting too. I sort of mentioned a conspiracy theory earlier. Isn't it interesting this fight was booked before Curtis Blaydes and Volkov? It was literally booked a couple days before Blaydes and Volkov. Would you not think that Lewis, with his winning streak, they would have wanted to set up Lewis and Blaydes? Right?
Yes.
I think they did that on purpose, because I think if Lewis wins here, I think they're going to try and push him towards a title shot over a guy like Curtis Blaydes, because everyone likes Derrick Lewis. That's just my theory. Like, think about it. He's fighting an old guy who's good by submissions. Lewis only has 1 submission loss. This almost looks to me like a fight that they want Derrick Lewis to win. And you just seen, even though Oleinik has a nice winning streak, he is a guy who has been knocked out. So I know that's a little off the board there, but I did find that interesting. They didn't wait to see the results of that fight, because I thought Lewis and Blaydes made the most sense. It's a notable opponent for Blaydes. He hasn't fought anyone. He hasn't fought Lewis yet. And I don't think that's a good stylistic matchup for Derrick Lewis, because I think Blaydes might be the best wrestler in the division outside of DC. So,
I agree with that.
Yeah. Like I kind of mentioned there, I think Lewis is going to crack him at some point. When? I'll go second, third round, maybe around there. But I do think Lewis will finish Oleinik. He'll be back in the win call. Well, he's already in the win column, but I think this will be sort of the old Derrick Lewis in this fight, where we'll see him get that really impressive knockout win, and Oleinik's winning streak comes to an end.
All right, so my one question would be for you. So I guess like that question that I posed basically means that you think when Oleinik is coming in for one of those takedowns that he gets clipped. My question would be, what about even if he doesn't get him down, but he makes him work and defend those takedowns against the cage, and the power depletion starts to go down? Do you think that he can drain Derrick Lewis enough in 5 rounds where, that he will be able to take the kill shot because it will be less powerful?
Yes, I think that is a possibility, because you just saw the cardio in the last fight with Oleinik. He's a guy that can, push the pace, and we saw that for 3 rounds against Verdum. So that is a bit concerning. You bring up a good point there. But you look at some of the opponents that Oleinik has fought. These aren't guys that are really known for the type of knockout power that Derrick Lewis has. I mean, Mark Hunt does, but I think we can agree that when he fought Mark Hunt was kind of at a point in his career where he was really slowing down, right? So it's tough to say sort of where the type of opponents that he's fought leading up to this, where I don't think, for example, he's fought someone with the knockout power that Lewis has, other than maybe like an Overeem. Like, I even think Lewis has probably better knockout power than Walt Harris does, right? So that's where I think it gets interesting. But yeah, that is a possibility, and that's a bit of a concern. This is one of those fights where I think the only way you would bet this is if you take Lewis by knockout. But I think other than that, I would personally just stay away, because it's like I said, could Oleinik out cardio him? Could he get him to the ground? That could happen, but I don't know. I just think whenever you have a guy who has the 1-punch knockout power like Lewis does, and it's a 5-round fight, it usually favors a guy like that. So that's why I'm going with Lewis.
Yeah, I mean, that's hard to disagree. 25 minutes is a long time, man, to hit the button one time. So, yeah, I get it. I totally get it. All right, well, that wraps up this Saturday's event. Before I let you go, I just want to ask you about the main and the co-main for UFC 252. The co-main, Rozenstruik, who I am a big fan of. I understand he took that quick loss to Francis because obviously he's not from this planet, right? So Rozenstruik against obviously the ageless Junior Dos Santos. Which way do you lean in that fight?
I'm going to go Rozenstruik in this one, only because I think JDS has taken way more damage. And even though he has had a couple wins in between there, Rozenstruik's still very dangerous. I mean, the fact that he knocked out Overeem with that much time left in the fight, I think speaks volumes to just that the fact that he can pack that much power even late in a fight. And I think, even though it is 3 rounds, I see Rozenstruik clipping him. Interesting thing though, right? They train together. They've trained together in the past. They're both from American top teams. So I asked Rozenstruik about that. I said, are you worried about anyone, spying on you or whatever? And he says, no big deal. But I think Rozenstruik is, a lot of people say he's a bit overrated, but I disagree. I think he's got some serious knockout power. And when you're fighting a guy like JDS at this stage in his career, and JDS is looking even lighter than normal, which I don't know if that's an advantage or disadvantage, but I think Rozenstruik probably knocks him out within the 3 rounds.
I agree. I don't understand the hate on Rozenstruik. I think that he is so technically sound. The guy was 68-4, I think, in kickboxing.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, I love everything about him. All right, main event. I've been looking forward to this fight, obviously, as you have for a while. Third installment. And are we in agreement? Probably the best heavyweight trilogy in the history of the sport.
Easily. And this might be one of the one fights we've had in UFC history that's really going to define a legacy. Like, if you think about it here, because if Stipe wins, he's got to be the greatest heavyweight of all time, him and Fedor, right? I would have to think. If DC wins, he sort of takes that thunder. He would have to be the best heavyweight of all time. We've never really had this where two guys are basically at the end of their career, still fighting at a high level, and it really defines their career after one fight. I mean, think about that. That's great. Like, maybe you could have done Khabib and Ferguson if that fight had ever happened. But I mean, they're not at the same age as Stipe and DC. So this is such a key and important fight here as far as that goes. But people ask me, what's your favorite fight coming up? This is it. 100%.
100%, man. I agree with you completely with it will cement two legacies in a very different way, I guess. I mean, if Cormier, if he walks off into the sunset, a two-time heavyweight champion in the UFC with all the other accolades in his combat sports career, I mean, he is at the very least in the conversation for the greatest of all time.
Yeah. Oh, 100%. 100%. And, it's so interesting. Like I might as well give you my pick now. I'm actually picking Cormier here. I think that he can go out there and, within the fact that it's in a smaller cage, I think that favors Cormier. I think the fact that Stipe, he was able to make adjustments in the first fight, but I think Cormier sort of learned from that, hey, maybe I got to make sure I'm not going to get hit to the body. Just with Cormier's knockout power, I think is very interesting. And the fact that Cormier has been training the whole time, Stipe hasn't. Right? Because at the beginning of this whole COVID thing, he was being a firefighter. He's not getting the type of training that DC is. So it favors him there. But I'll tell you this, man, I'm a big Stipe fan. I don't like the way the media really favors DC. Like, you even look in the promos and everything, it's like you'd almost think that DC's the champ with the way he's acting. He's got a show on ESPN, and he's a commentator. Like, there's all these reasons for people to want it. And people don't like, for whatever reason, Stipe as a champion. He's not like a boisterous, outspoken guy. He's not like a huge personality. I feel like he's almost being overlooked here in this fight again. And Stipe can absolutely win this fight, but like I would like to see Stipe win, just to show that, look, like, it's not all about being this great personality. It's about just being a fighter at the end of the day. So I'd love to see Stipe win, but I think Cormier's got it. But we'll see. You never know. I found that interesting that they did it in a small case.
I bet Cormier in the second fight. Who were you on in the second fight?
I was on Cormier as well. I really thought that it was that because of the knockout power and because of the fact that Stipe was getting up there a little bit in age, I felt that Cormier had his number. But I was so impressed. I was at that fight last year in Anaheim.
What do you think turned that fight around, James? Because he was in such control through 2 rounds.
I think it's just coaching. I think his coach, Marcus Marinelli, I think is his name. He is one of the most underrated coaches in the sport. And I think he said to Stipe, look, we found an opening here. Go for it. Take advantage of it. I think that was purely coaching, because Stipe doesn't strike me as a guy, and I don't mean this in an offensive way. He doesn't strike me as a guy who's like very cerebral when it comes to the fight game. He seems like a fighter to me that just goes on autopilot with whatever his coach tells him, where I feel like DC has probably got better fight IQ in that sense.
Yeah. And, I agree with you completely. Like, I really love Stipe as a heavyweight champion, and I agree. He doesn't get the love, and he deserves a ton of love, because that pedestal that everybody put Cain Velasquez on, that's the pedestal that Stipe deserves to really be on, in my opinion, right? But at the same time, I love Daniel Cormier so much. And so I love that he gets so much love, because he's got such like a perfect personality. He's so likable, right?
Yeah. No, I get that. And I think if Cormier was fighting anyone else, I'd feel the same way. I just feel like in general, people just for whatever reason haven't warmed up to Stipe as the champ. And I feel like we forget that he is the champ. Do you know what I mean? Like, I feel like that's crazy. Like, we don't usually see that in any division. It almost reminds me a bit of how Holloway, everyone was, that's a podcast for another day about that last fight with him and Volkanovski. But I almost feel like in some ways that like people forget that Volkanovski the champ too, right? Like, it's crazy. So,
yep. All right, so before I let you go, I guess the only 2 things that I would ask you would be, well, one, I haven't heard a lot of people. Everybody I've talked to is on Stipe. Now, I haven't decided personally. I think I lean your way this third time, but everybody that I've heard is on Stipe. And the second thing everybody brings up are those goddamn eye pokes. What do you think about the eye pokes?
I think they played a factor, but I don't think they were the determining factor as far as the fight goes and everything else. I think it's something to keep an eye on, no pun intended. But I think it's I'm not of the conspiracy group that says that that's the reason DC won those fights. I mean, look, John Jones is another guy who's been known for eye pokes, and I don't see a lot of people talking about that with him. So that's just something to keep in mind as well. That is it a factor? Yes, but I don't think it's the reason that he won those fights.
Well, James, I'm a fan of yours. I had a lot of fun for this past hour. Let everybody know where they can find you and what you're up to, my friend.
Well, first off, thank you so much for having me on. I love chatting with people who know the sport so well, like yourself. It's so fun to get in and dig into these fights and just hear different perspectives. You know, I have, like I said, I'm a very statistical person when it comes to my breakdowns, not very technical. So it's cool to hear your perspective on that. Your audience can check me out on Twitter and on Instagram at Lynch on Sports. I work for like 10 different outlets, now up to maybe even a little bit more. So I post a lot of work from a lot of different places. So if you just follow me on Twitter, you can find all my content on there. And more importantly, man, thank you so much for having me on.
Yeah, thank you. Obviously, everybody that watches my show knows how much we love the UFC. And James Lynch is he's an auto listen on whatever kind of MMA content that he has going on over at his channel. Check him out on Twitter. And that's it, boys. You know the drill. That's our time. We'll see you later in the week, obviously. And don't forget, join the movement. Run pure. Later.